This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, kicks off today's show with this week's grain market outlook. He discusses an upcoming report and where the markets are currently looking. Continuing the show is the Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Phillip Lancaster, and Bob Larson, as these experts talk about why, what, and when you feed your cattle should change during heat, and what criteria cattle producers may want to evaluate if looking at culling cows. K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond ends today's show by explaining why Kansas has been receiving recent moisture and what we can expect for the next week. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Friday show with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien for a grain market update. Dan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Dan, starting our conversation off a little bit differently and wanting to talk about the USDA NASS report that's coming out Monday, August 12th.
Yes, the WASDE report following the NASS crop production report will give us our first survey-based set of numbers for U.S. corn, grain, sorghum, and soybean production and some other crops. We've been having wheat production numbers already, and we'd seen a sizable impact in the July report from that. But the corn report will no doubt focus will center around what the yields, acres, and total production number will be. And there can certainly be some changes that can occur in the usage side. And if anything, given the pace of exports of late, I wouldn't be surprised that we may see some reduction in export numbers for corn and maybe for grain sorghum. But the big game changers will be that August report. And you and I have talked about this for several weeks. The USDA sent surveys out to farmers to get their opinion on what they thought their yields were. But because of the earliness of crop development, didn't actually go out themselves around that August 1st timeframe and do any in-field measurements. So what we'll see will be largely what the USDA got back from survey data. And I don't know. I guess we'll see if farmers are optimistic or pessimistic about their crop production this year. Now, the September report will have all those same farmer surveys plus, the USDA will be out and get their own data. So August is important. September is probably especially important. And I would not be surprised, given the crop ratings that we've had for corn and for soybeans, which are generally positive, that we'll see something around the USDA's projection, 181 bushels per acre, 15.3 billion bushels of corn. Greg Ivandahl in our shop has come out with projections based on crop ratings of even higher than that. So we shall see. I guess in my own cautious thoughts, I wonder about some Western Corn Belt drought impacts, some Eastern Corn Belt, Far Eastern Corn Belt, Ohio, parts of Indiana being awfully dry, being excessively wet up in northern Iowa, southern Minnesota, South Dakota, and then on over into Wisconsin, parts of Michigan. So I get the idea that rain makes grain, but I just want to retain a healthy caution before we just go buy full in. And even if this August report comes out, especially for corn and maybe for soybeans, and says, gosh, we expect high numbers, we may not know, and we won't know the final outcome on this until we actually get into September and get in some areas start to see very early harvest to south and wet corn coming out and such as that. Now, all that said, if we do get what's expected, again, indication of strong yields, then I don't know where markets would go. I think we're basically with the type of prices we've seen on yesterday's closes, with again Dees corn at $3.97, that'd be Dees 24 corn, and November soybeans at 10.08 and a quarter. I think they're already factoring in their expectations of large crops, and really that if there's a chance I guess the question to ask is, if we get large numbers, do we go much lower at all? Is it neutral? Or really are we relying on something less than these record yields eventually to bring some more volatility to the market and actually bring something to the upside? So either way, if there are changes right now that'll come out in that report Monday, I'd expect them, even if they come in with somewhat less production, I don't know that you'd see, unless it's just a sterling surprise, see a lot of movement to the upside. I think we'll still have to wait till September, October to see how all that comes out. And for wheat, again, most of the winter wheat numbers pretty well set. We're waiting for spring wheat, the spring wheat crop to be finalized. Crop ratings for spring wheat still looking very good. Really, this last week as high as it's been for the last 3 or 4 years as far as percent good to excellent. So really not a lot of surprises expected on the production side. So I guess that'd be my take with regard to that report. It's hard to see, given the momentum and the narrative of the market, much that would change the large crop, low price scenario. But and I just don't know if the August report will have enough close knowledge of everything to bring much change in that scenario. I think probably looking out to September, October, November to see anything different than that.
As we're thinking about prices, Dan, what are you seeing for cash?
Cash prices, again, we're seeing corn basis looking pretty positive, and here in the midst of I guess pretty negative price trends. You've got a 65 over basis in Garden City, $4.44 cash prices, 44 cents over in Colby at 423, 419 in Hutchinson at 40 over, and generally Topeka 20 over, and Salina about 13 over. And when you look at the trends in the western 2/3 of the state, you've had in the last several weeks some run up during the summer months, but that really hasn't continued in most areas. That probably the most positive trend that we've seen has been in the Hutchinson area. I would say though in the eastern third of the state, around the Topeka area, around Columbus, down the southeast corner, very, very level. Really kind of, and I think anyway, Shelby, it's an indicator in those areas that, hey, it doesn't look like we're caught short anywhere. We have adequate supplies. We'll wait it out for the next crop. I would say though, when you look at basis trends for soybeans, and again, you can see us in the report that we put together each week. We've had in the Dodge City area, Salina area, Hutchinson area, Topeka, and also Columbus, and Colby only just so, but in all those areas, sharp increases in basis levels. Of course, that's the basis is going up, and the future's been falling down, so it may be just an effort just to hold their own in terms of where the cash markets are. But still, it is noticeable that soybean basis at the local level has been increasing, and you're seeing that happen at a time when of course, the futures are coming down. So I guess the way I would view that is that in those markets, there's a desire or a recognition on the part of elevator bids, those making those elevator bids, that, hey, we're not representing necessarily local supply demand that well with only looking at the futures keeping basis level. We've got they're increasing basis to kind of stay what they see to be an equilibrium market situation in most of the state.
Dan, are you seeing any other trends when it comes to basis?
For wheat, really, although we'd seen probably about similar situations with the weakening of wheat futures. We've seen basis about a month and a half ago in some of these areas, about 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago, move higher. A little bit stronger in Colby, Salina area, Hutchinson, especially so, a bit in the Topeka area, and also, a little bit in Columbus. You've seen basis move higher right after harvest, but in general, move sideways from there out. I would say that if basis for wheat is moving, you'd be seeing something in wheat exports probably. That's what you'd be looking at. And we did have a good week of U.S. wheat exports, a lot of that coming out of the hard red spring side. And we've been up and down here of late for hard red winter wheat. Overall, we're sitting at about 32% of the way bought ahead, shipped and bought for the hard red winter wheat market. We're about 32% of the way to 240 million bushels USDA projected, and only about 17% of the way, about 9 weeks into the market year. So still looking pretty positive. And, the trends we're still seeing out in the world wheat market with not the best conditions in the Black Sea region, too wet, crop damage in Europe, and questions up and down elsewhere, and uncertainty down in Argentina. There still are issues that could eventually drive much stronger, or much stronger is kind of a surprising term to use in terms of the wheat market, but at least moderately stronger U.S. wheat exports. And we shall see. Again, we've just had such headwinds from the higher value U.S. currency in the wheat market that it's anything that turned out being positive for us would be really almost truly labeled as a surprise right now.
Dan, as we round out today's conversation, any thoughts you'd like to share with our growers about crop progress?
Well, I do think that it is surprising as you stack these crops up that we had adequate moisture. Generally, the trends for percent good to excellent, pretty positive all the way through. The only one that's not for us would be grain sorghum. That's been falling off. But again, that's been in grain sorghum in Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma, areas that have been a little hotter and drier. So I guess we'll see. So much of what happens now in the grain market will be probably dependent on what Chip Redmond out of our weather shop tells us in terms of the weather in the next 30 to 45 to 60 days as we try to, as we get through August and September and make our way into harvest. How do we finish these crops out? And I still am cautious about the whole issue of rain always making grain, especially in some of these areas to the north where it'd be a horse race between the moisture they have and the lateness of their planting and the unevenness of their development. We shall see.
Dan, I appreciate you once again joining us and giving us our grain market update.
Thank you, Shelby. I appreciate being on.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we'll have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Friday show, hearing from the Beef Cattle Institute's Cattle Chat podcast with Brad White, Bob Larson, and Phillip Lancaster.
How do we manage rations and feeding when it comes to heat? And Phillip, I'm going to be more specific with this one. So we're not talking about pasture cattle. We're talking about if we were raising heifers for replacement heifers or we're raising yearling bulls and we've got them in a dry lot scenario, their appetite's going to drop some when it gets hot. Do I need to adjust the ration or change anything in that environment?
Feed intake's going to drop off. So that means energy intake is going to decrease. And so you're not going to get the performance that you want from two aspects. One, maintenance requirements are going to go up because they're trying to get rid of that extra heat. And then two, they're not eating as many calories. And so one of the things that we can try to do to alleviate is to increase the energy density of the diet. So we can decrease the amount of roughage in the diet and add more concentrates so that they're consuming more calories. But the other thing that happens is the heat of fermentation is actually less when they're fermenting starches in grains compared to when they're fermenting forages.
Which seems a little bit counterintuitive to me that you would have a higher intensity diet and the heat of fermentation is less.
Mm-hmm. So because of the way that those different carbohydrates are fermented to what we call the volatile fatty acids, when starches are fermented, we don't have as much carbon dioxide produced during that fermentation as we do with forages, and that is the metabolism part of that creates the heat. And so we have less heat per unit of carbohydrate consumed with a starch than with a forage.
Well, and we're providing that meal in a bolus typically, which is different than our grazing cattle, which are grazing continuously, and we don't see as much, and they're in a different environment. So hard to compare grazing to this dry lot scenario that we have. So Bob, what are some of the things as we think about managing that heat diet? Do you change the time of day that you feed, or do you feed at the same time of day?
No, I think you need to think about that because kind of the peak heat of the day is mid-afternoon. And as Phillip was saying, you've got the heat of fermentation. So we're trying to avoid having, a big belly full right during the middle of the afternoon because that's going to kind of compound those two things. So a lot of people talk about feeding really early in the morning, or technically you could do it, kind of after. So late evening, early morning, so that by the time you're getting in the middle of the afternoon, they're starting to get hungry and they're not as actively creating heat of digestion.
Well, it's not different for us in that during the heat of the day, you're not as hungry, but then the rumen, and you talked about that heat from fermentation, how long does that occur after they have a meal?
Well, for several hours, but it's going to peak probably somewhere around 3 to 6 hours or so after a meal. So Bob, there's some good research that shows that if you can do it, feeding those cattle in the evening in the hot weather, then that heat of fermentation is going to happen in the cooler morning hours when they can dissipate that extra heat a lot better. And so their performance actually improves quite a bit.
Yeah, because if we feed them at 8 or 9 in the morning, they're heating up right as the day is heating up, and then it's hard for them to dissipate. So if you get it done at night, that makes sense. And that makes sense for cattle that are on a pure concentrate diet. For some of these scenarios where we talked about heifers or bulls, do I not only want to feed more energy dense, should I back off if I know? So we're talking in general summer, but now I know a heat wave's coming. It's going to be 104 the next 3 days. Should I increase or decrease the amount that I feed them?
I would decrease the amount that you're going to feed them so that, and you can begin making more instance. And we can do something maybe not quite as extreme, but more toward what we would call a limit feeding type of program where we can make that diet more energy dense, but then we can limit the amount. Instead of put how full feed, we can limit the amount. So we're getting the right calories for them to grow what we want, but the appetite depression from the heat of heat stress is not going to have as big an impact because we've got a more energy dense diet.
One other big nutrient that we know is hugely important during times of heat is water. Any tips on managing water as we go through this hot time period? And do I need to add in maybe an extra water source that we don't normally have?
I think that's something you have to think about the pen size, how many animals we're talking about, and plenty of water space. And so one of the things I think to consider is to bring in an extra tank. So that there's any animal that's thirsty at all should be able to get access to that water quickly. They shouldn't have to stand in line.
No, I think it's right. Yeah. I mean, big open source tank that they can lots of drink from, because the ball fountain is probably not going to keep up with those cattle during the heat event. Because it's not designed to flow as fast.
Well, we want to be sure that we're checking it frequently, that we've got fresh water there, because some of those big tanks, if I'm filling it every day, it's going to be fresh. If I'm not, then it's going to get stagnant pretty quick. Same thing as we watch our ball flow tank to be sure that it is keeping up, that the well can pump as they're drinking, because they're going to drink a lot more water. So thanks for your thoughts on heat feeding and managing that diet, including the water portion of that.
The BCI experts continue their conversation as they discuss what criteria cattle producers might want to look at if they're thinking about going ahead and culling a few of their cows.
I mean, cows right now, late summer, should look about the best as they do all year.
That's true.
They're nursing a calf. They've had grass all summer. As they go through, depending on where you are, as long as you've had rain, you've got good grass, they should look about as good as they can. What are some of the things that you guys would start to think about, be they disease, like you just mentioned, or nutrition, that might make me think of getting those cows out of the herd a little bit early? Because now would actually not be a bad time if I had to cull, but I'm not quite to preg check time yet. It's a little bit different time of year. If you were evaluating the cows, and Phillip, I'll ask you first, what are some of the things you'd look at that might make you say, I think I'm going to remove her from the herd this year?
Well, I think the number one thing, because we're still in the nursing period, is if she lost her calf. So if the calf died, even if she's bred, you may still want to go ahead and pull her and sell her off instead of keeping her around for another year without a calf on her, without weaning a calf this year. There might be some reasons to separate cows, not necessarily cull them, but separate them. So if I've got some younger cows that have gotten thin, I might want to separate them off where I can feed them some more, or even some older cows that have gotten thin. I want to separate them off where I can supplement them a little bit more than I need to the whole rest of the herd to reduce my feed cost.
One thing to maybe keep an eye on, and I'll ask Phillip about this as well, is calf performance. If you've got a calf that's really pretty small for his age compared to the other calves in the herd. I'm starting to be concerned about her udder. Does she have mastitis? Does she have a couple blind quarters or something like that? And a lot of times those are problems that aren't going to get better next year. And again, if I can sell her, ahead of the low in the cull cow market, and when she's still got some pretty good body condition on her, I might be better off to make those decisions earlier rather than later.
That's been kind of the theme as we talked through. And
earlier.
And some of those conditions we have to think about. Like, so if she has, for example, blind quarters, that's not getting better.
Yeah.
That's not going to change over time. If she had some of the other medical conditions that you mentioned, it's possible, it's likely that it's going to get better, but it's not 100% guarantee. So it depends on where I am and where my herd size, where I want that to be. What about thin cows right now? Late summer, the rest of the herd looks great. I have 1 or 2 cows that are really thin, and my options are I could investigate, do a health workup, or I could decide to just keep them and see if they're pregnant or not, or I could decide to cull them. Where do you guys land on that?
I guess my first thing is it health or is it nutrition? And maybe figuring out why they're so much thinner than the rest of the herd, and then I can make decisions from there based on what I think is best for that cow. And maybe bringing in some records into that decision. Is she a cow? If I keep individual records, is she a cow that normally produces a heavier calf than average? Then maybe she's a really good milker, and for whatever reason this year the grass is just not up to par for her. But getting all that information to make those decisions.
I think it's kind of the way you said it. It's a decision in that when you've got a group of cows and they're all on the same diet, they're all on the same pasture, I don't expect them to have exactly the same body condition. Some are a little bit easier keepers, some a little bit less so. And so when you have a cow that's kind of on that thinner end, maybe that's just typical for her. Maybe that's just normal, and she's still very productive. Her calf is going to do great. But then my animals that have problems, so there might be problems with their teeth, might be problems with their digestive system, liver, those types of things, they're also going to be thin. So then my question is, when I've got a thin cow, is she's fine, but that's the way she is, or is she one of these cows that has a problem? So that's kind of the work up the thin cow, because I don't know at this stage whether it's honestly not a problem. Maybe she needs a little more nutrition, but maybe she's just a little bit thinner. Or is this an early indication that her actual weight is going to continue to drop because she's got a serious problem? So have your veterinarian kind of work it up, really see if you can figure out why.
Once again, that was the Beef Cattle Institute's Bob Larson, Brad White, and Phillip Lancaster. If you'd like to listen to the full podcast episode, you can do so by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by searching for Cattle Chat on the podcast streaming platform of your choice. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Friday show with a weather update with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Chip, this past week, Kansas has seen some precipitation.
Yeah, most notably Wednesday night and Thursday along the I-70 corridor. A lot of folks got some much-needed rainfall. I know folks in north-central Kansas, around the Ottawa, Lincoln County area were really struggling, as well as further south. There's some rainfall amounts that were over an inch to even localized over an inch and a half. And that's about 1.5 times or even double their weekly average precipitation. That is falling this time of year, so we tend to get less precipitation as we go through August. Unfortunately, looking at some of the corn driving around the state so far, it might be a little too late for a lot of the corn. But I know soybeans right now is really, really heavily dependent upon moisture and really needs it to keep up, especially with the recent dry conditions we've seen. In fact, this week on the drought monitor, we saw the amount of moderate or worse drought not quite double, but increased by over 15%, and a big increase in the drought monitor. And that's a result of just the really hot, really dry conditions. And it was something that we knew was going to start to happen as summer went on, but unfortunately it kind of hit about a time when the corn especially really needs some moisture. And so those drought expansions of about 15% is not what we wanted to see. But thankfully, we brought some rainfall in here, and that rainfall fell after the drought cutoff of this week. The drought updates are made every Tuesday morning as a cutoff, and so any rainfall that falls beyond that is considered for next week's drought monitor, and that cutoff will be next Tuesday.
Are we going to see a change in our pattern, Chip?
Yeah, so this rain event was kind of the first sign of things to come. When we look at the moisture to our west, monsoonal activities picked up again thanks to two hurricanes that are actually rotating around each other right now in the East Pacific. That moisture got drawn up north and eastward into the southwest of the United States and has rejuvenated the monsoons that they badly need. And what we're having is that high pressure over the southwest and western United States that's providing the monsoon as weak systems are riding over the top of it down into the central plains. And this is the first such system that we saw this week of a pattern that's going to persist for the next 5 to 6 days of multiple systems day after day coming around the top of that and drawing in that monsoonal moisture and pulling it eastward into the central plains. And so that's going to provide continued opportunities for precipitation as you go into the middle of next week. And some of the forecasts are pretty aggressive, multiple inches of rain in places where storms persist the most, but most notably, especially that southwest, south central, that missed out on this rainfall this week are favored for precipitation going in for the next 5 days.
What are we going to see after the middle of next week?
We're going to see conditions more questionable, to be honest with you. With the precipitation chances, increased cloud cover will be cooler through definitely the middle of next week. And the question kind of turns to what do the tropics do? Because the tropics are a big influencer of a weather pattern right now. Not directly. They're not getting any impacts from hurricanes, but indirectly, like this similar increase in precipitation. And so it looks like the East Pacific starts to quiet down, and the potential is there then for the monsoons to then quiet down. So we'll expect drying conditions to get later into next week, and then temperatures start to warm back up as that high pressure starts to rebuild and re-strengthen, and we don't see those frequent systems going over the top and into the central plains.
So, Chip, for the rest of August, after we get through the middle of next week, planning to go back to warmer, dry weather?
Yep, that's definitely the plan. When we look at the August outlooks, the whole state pretty much is favored for above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation. So this last couple of days and then moving forward with those increased precipitation chances, it's going to really buck the trend. And we've kind of seen this all summer where we get just dry enough for a lot of stress, but we are getting some timely moisture. And the hope is that we can kind of continue that, and maybe these outlooks of extreme dry and extreme drought, maybe we're not going to verify in the summer. I'm hopeful we don't. If we can just keep timely precipitation coming through the rest of the month, we can definitely offset a lot of the concerns we have. But granted, again, I know it's too late for a lot of folks. I know they're chopping corn in places already. But overall, this summer has not been nearly as severe as we kind of thought it would be initially. And a lot of that's due to what's going on in the West Pacific.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. That's all we have for you this week on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you on Monday.